We're grateful to Sienna Muller-Stuen and Noah Muller-Stuen for being our scripture readers on this day. Our readings are from the book of Exodus, the 19th chapter, the first few verses 1 to 6, and chapter 20, the 10 Commandments, verses 1 to 17, and then the Gospel of Matthew in the 22nd chapter. I invite you to listen for God's living word. On the third new moon, after the Israelites had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that very day, they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They had journeyed from Rephidim, entered the wilderness of Sinai, and camped in the wilderness. Israel camped there in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob and tell the Israelites, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation."
Then God spoke all these words, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me.
You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to or worship them.
You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God.
Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy.
Honor your father and your mother.
You shall not murder.
You shall not commit adultery.
You shall not steal.
You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor.
You shall not covet your neighbor's home. You shall not covet your neighbor's spouse, or anything that belongs to your neighbor.
Jesus said, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment.
And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets."
We bless our children as they go now to church school. And he will raise you up on eagle's wing, bear you on the breath of dawn, make you to shine like the sun, and When the Israelites reached the foot of Mount Sinai, here's what happened. Moses called all the elders together and told them to get the people ready. Ordinary life stopped for 3 days to focus on preparations. The people scrubbed their clothes clean and they gathered at the foot of the mountain. And Moses prayed for them. He blessed them, consecrated them, and told them to wait while he went up the mountain. It had taken them 3 moons, 3 months, to get to Mount Sinai. And even though their journey will go on for many, many more years, there's no mistaking that this is the place where Exodus chapters 1 to 18 have been heading. After all those years in slavery, after God had heard their anguished cries and sent Moses to demand their release, after God had rescued them from the Red Sea and brought them to the wilderness, after God provided for their sustenance, sending manna to eat and water to drink, after all that, they arrive at the holy mountain to wait for a great revelation. To make sure everyone understands what a big deal this is, all of creation seems to join the show. There's thunder and there's lightning. There's a fire and a cloud so thick it's like heaven has miraculously dropped down around the mountain. There are trumpets blaring too, a little less miraculously perhaps, but still a worthy contribution to the drama. When Moses comes down from the Smoky Mountain, he gathers all the men and the women and the children around him so that he can tell them what God is now giving them. We're told they are trembling. I imagine them huddled close together, shoulder to shoulder, shivering, knees shaking, all of them quietly quivering in anxiety and anticipation and awe as the very ground beneath them shifts. God is making a covenant with them. It's not exactly a new covenant. Generations ago, God had told Abraham and Sarah that he would be their God and they would be his people. And ever since then, God has hovered over them like a mother eagle, watching over her young fledglings, protecting them, sheltering them, guiding them, watching for when they would be ready to learn how to fly. All the time, God has been with them. So the 10 Commandments Moses carries down are an extension of the first covenant. They are a covenant within the covenant, meant to make more explicit what it means to be God's very own. The delivery of the covenant is a moment full of meaning. As the Book of Common Prayer puts it, nowhere in the Old Testament is God's will for us shown more clearly than in the giving of the 10 Commandments. And if all the thunder and the lightning in the sky, the smoking and shuddering of the mountain, and the blaring of a trumpet don't seem miraculous enough for you, there is a strand of Jewish rabbinic tradition which holds that on this day, when all the Israelites gathered around, the wombs of pregnant women became transparent, so that even the not yet born children could witness this event for themselves, and a lifetime later tell their own great-grandchildren that they were there when it happened. We know the 10 Commandments are important, and yet most of us would be hard-pressed to name all 10 of them if asked. The author, Lauren Winner, argues that we often acknowledge the Decalogue, the 10 words, even as we minimize it. We simultaneously lift it up and evade it. We invoke the 10 Commandments, but we don't really engage them. To see for myself the point she's trying to make, I put the words 10 Commandments in the search engine of Amazon. And up popped a book with the title, The 10 Commandments of Dating, which was followed, of course, by the 10 Commandments of Marriage. And then the 10 Commandments of math and the 10 Commandments of power mind golf. Go to Google and you'll find out that there are 10 commandments for training your dog, for decorating your rental apartment, for practicing yoga, for dealing with a business failure, and for working in a hostile environment. The list goes on, but Winner had already won me over. We laugh at the 10 Commandments genre, but our many variations on the theme point to the truth that there's something important about the Decalogue. For one thing, the idea of it endures. It carries something essential for us, even if we don't always remember the details. In a form that is memorable, in language both direct and directive, the 10 Commandments encapsulate an entire ethos. In the popular religious imagination, however, many are persuaded that the ethos is authoritarian and legalistic, and that the commandments are imposed by a stern and judgmental God. It's an understanding not helped by the fact that former Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore first became famous for waging and losing a stubborn fight to keep a monument of the 10 Commandments outside the Alabama Supreme Court building where he once served as Chief Justice. He used to haul the monument along with him to public appearances on the bed of a flatbed truck. No small feat of engineering ingenuity, given that the thing weighed close to 5,280 pounds, or just over 500 pounds per commandment. It's no wonder that the 10 Commandments are seen as being so heavy, as burdensome obligations and restrictions with a finger wagging, "Thou shalt not," at the center of each one. Earlier this summer, when I was at a conference, I was honored to meet Tom Long, a seminary preaching professor and prolific author. I appreciate everything he writes. Some years ago, I came across his article on the 10 Commandments, and it completely shifted my perspective. The title, Dancing the Decalogue, gives you some idea of his unexpected approach. To understand the 10 Commandments, Long says, we have to look at the context in which the commandments were given. They don't begin with the demanding order, "These are my rules, obey them." No, we are meant to back up a bit, to hear the gracious reminder God gives the Israelites at the beginning of chapter 19, so that they and we can hear the word that they already belong to God, that these people are precious in God's sight, that they and we are God's very own treasure. And then, at the beginning of chapter 20, God prefaces the beginning of the 10 Commandments with this breathtaking announcement. "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." The 10 Commandments make the most sense when we see them as part of the larger story of God's goodness and mercy, and when we recognize that they are meant to show us how life is meant to be lived in light of liberation. The Israelites learn what right relationship looks like so that what happened to them in Egypt will not be repeated among them. Indeed, the commandments are all about relationships. Jesus pointed out that the first tablet of the Decalogue can be summed up with this word: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And the second tablet, love your neighbor as yourself. But as Jesus himself showed us, love of God and love of neighbor are not easily separated. They are intertwined. If you truly love God, that love will well up and spill over in how you treat your neighbor. And if you love your neighbors, truly love them, respect them, honor them, treat them with kindness and concern, then it can be said you are treating them the same way that God would. Which is perhaps what the commandments are most about. As we follow them, we are imitating God. As God showed love for the Israelites while they were yet in bondage, so the commandments instruct them and us to act towards others in ways that are comparable. Be merciful to others as God is merciful to you, they say. Remember when you were slaves in the land of Egypt and how God set you free. Remember, and then shape your lives ethically around that profound story, turning toward every neighbor and everyone in need in ways that hold them in the same high regard and show them the same kind of compassion. In other words, in the giving of the 10 Commandments, God has chosen not to try to do everything in the world all by God's own self. As one commentator put it, God has chosen to use human agents in carrying out divine purposes in the world. God moves over to give us an important role to play. The Decalogue is God's invitation to us to be God's collaborators. We will probably always refer to them as the 10 Commandments. But we might also think of them as descriptions of the way of life that prevails in the zone of God's liberation. Hear them in this light. Because the Lord is your God, you are free not to need any other gods. That comes first. Second, you are free to worship and adore the God who can never be reduced to a manageable size. Third, you are free from those who would try to use God's name to manipulate you. Fourth, you are free to rest on the seventh day. Remember, you are no longer slaves in Egypt. No one, not even God, and maybe especially God, expects you to work every day of your life. And because God rested on the seventh day of creation, you are to follow God's own good example. All of this also means that you are free from the prison of self-centeredness. So 5, you are free to honor your parents and the ancestors of your faith. 6, you are free from the murderous cycle of violence, free to live in God's shalom, God's wholeness and peace. 7, you are free from the destructive path of adultery, free to live a life of faithfulness and trust. 8, you are free from the constant worry that someone is trying to take your stuff, and you are free to live off what God provides you. 9, you are free from gossip and lies about your character, and you, in turn, are free to speak the truth in love. And 10, you are free from the never-ending cycle of always wanting more. All this is to say that the 10 Commandments are meant to be wings, not weights. Wings that enable us to catch the wind of God's Spirit so that together we can soar. Or, as Tom Long suggests, if we want to symbolize how the Ten Commandments are meant to work among us, we would do well to hold a dance. Look now and see the people huddled together at the base of Mount Sinai. See how they stand next to each other, shoulder to shoulder, how their hands reach out across to one another, and how their feet move together across the ground. The music they hear is the good news of the God who has set them free. The dance steps they follow are the commandments God has given them so that they will move together without stepping on each other's toes or kicking each other's shins. They will hold each other with a gentle touch, and they will turn toward every neighbor without fear. They will bend low to raise up every person who is still held captive and is in need. And they will lift their children high into the air for a wide look around. And their great-grandchildren, who are not yet born, will come after them, and they will join the dance, and they will remember how it first happened. Amen.